Hi, I'm Bob Fry, representing Climate Restoration Technologies, or CRT for short, in Omaha, Nebraska, USA. This talk is about CRT's Earth 2075 Carbon Dioxide Initiative. It is titled, Targeting a Return to 280 ppm. It was the first of two presentations given by CRT at the 6th International Conference on Climate Change, Impacts and Responses, held in Reykjavik, Iceland, with Dr. Sam Chowdhury presenting. A simple bookkeeping type model was developed for CO2 intervention impact assessment. It accounts for natural sinks, land use change emissions, fossil fuel and cement emissions, plus geoengineering capture targets. Model details have been submitted for separate publication. 4 different target forecast scenarios were modeled. The first was an unchecked or business as usual scenario. The second was an emissions control scenario involving CO2 emissions cap and reduction only. The third was a high-impact geoengineering CO2 capture-only scenario. The fourth, dual-pronged intervention scenario involved both high-impact capture and emissions control. Curve A is a projection of emissions from fossil fuel consumption and cement production in the case of an unchecked scenario. Unless something changes, emissions will reach 17 billion tons carbon per year by 2034. CRT believes emissions will continue to rise from today through 2022. By 2023, humanity should find the CO2 brakes and summon the will to apply them, developing an emissions cap at 12 billion tons carbon per year. Revised targets for reducing global emissions are shown by curve C. We believe this is the best emissions control that can be realistically achieved. Developing countries cannot control emissions while meeting rising energy needs and expanding their economy. Their emissions are clearly going to increase. Today's industrial nations would compensate by sharply curtailing their own emissions, effecting global reduction by half to 6 billion tons carbon per year by 2050, and half again to 3 billion tons carbon per year by 2062. If developing countries finally join the reduction effort in 2063, final emissions of 1 billion tons carbon per year should occur by 2078. Economic reality requires that developing countries be granted an emissions control waiver until 2063 in order to meet rising energy needs and enable economic development. This slide adds atmospheric mixing ratio impact. The solid red curve, A1, is our model's forecast of the atmospheric PPM CO2 impact of unchecked emissions. Annual emissions in billion tons carbon are read from the left y-axis for curve A, and ppm CO2 are read from the right y-axis for curve A1. A1 just keeps rising, but we don't plot above 500 ppm because we believe that range leads to disaster. A1 star is the point at which atmospheric CO2 would cross James Hansen's 450 ppm tipping level for irreversibly seeding catastrophic warming. Barring intervention, 450 ppm would occur by 2029, which precisely agrees with the latest IPCC forecast. This 2029 A1 star tipping level is only 15 years away. Forestalling it will require swift and powerful intervention. Curve C1 is our model's forecast of the atmospheric ppm CO2 impact of emissions control according to curve C. It can be seen that ppm curve C1 crosses the tipping level at C1 star, which is 2034, only a few years after A1 star. Curve C1 is improved over A1 in the long term. But C1 still crosses the 450 ppm tipping level by 2034, which indicates that emissions control only is not a satisfactory solution. Curve C is already the best emissions control solution that may realistically be implemented. Given current emissions of 10 billion tons carbon per year, today's rising trend, a population exceeding 7 billion and growing, the emergence of developing countries, and a corresponding energy demand, which is expected to at least double during this century. The main point is that tipping level C1 star is only 5 years delayed beyond A1 star. That is unfortunately the best that can be expected with a single-pronged solution, such as emissions control. This is a 50-year extended plot showing eventual restoration of 350 ppm by 2135 for the emissions control only scenario. Atmospheric impact curve C1 would remain above the 450 ppm tipping level for 33 years. It would remain above today's 400 ppm level for 77 years. It would remain above Hansen's designated 350 ppm safe limit for 147 years. That represents too many years with excess heat accumulation. A risk is that thermal lag will catch up and magnify the impact of both present and future heat accumulation. We've essentially waited too long to only cut emissions. Today's unsafe warming accumulation is represented by the small red-hatched area, which extends back 12 years to 1988. Unfortunately, a much larger future warming accumulation is represented by the extended black-hatched area under the C1 curve. To summarize the emissions control only scenario, 147 years of excess unsafe heat would accumulate from 1988 through 2135. In this case, thermal lag will catch up, eventually raising today's 0.8 degrees C warming substantially. This will almost certainly exceed a variety of tipping levels. It risks irreversibly seeding catastrophic warming. It further risks global drought and famine, an accelerated marine die-off, destabilized polar ice, an abrupt 10-meter sea rise from collapse of the western Antarctic ice sheet and the Greenland ice sheet, likely forcing abandonment of major coastal cities. There is further risk of global economic collapse due to climate change, sea rise, and forced abandonment of coastal cities, which others have already forecasted. The bottom line is that we've waited too long to only cut emissions. This slide shows another scenario, which is geoengineering capture of CO2 at the exceptionally amplified rate of 10 billion tons carbon per year. That exceeds the capacity of today's single-stage unamplified geoengineering capture concepts. But CRT offers a high-impact, dual-stage amplified approach described in a second video available on this website. In this scenario, dual-stage amplified capture, according to curve D, is the only intervention considered, and emissions would still rise unchecked, according to dashed red curve A. The amplified 10 billion ton carbon per year section of capture curve D is intended to last 45 years. It should then diminish to an unamplified maintenance capture level of 1 billion tons carbon per year after 2070. The resulting purple PPM forecast curve AD1 delays tipping level crossing AD1 star for 18 years until 2047, compared to A1 star in 2029. But the AD1 star tipping level is still crossed by mid-century, indicating that even maximum amplified geoengineering capture is insufficient if that is the only intervention made. Geoengineering capture alone is still only a single-pronged approach, and it would be overwhelmed by mid-century with unchecked emissions. We believe 10 billion tons carbon per year is the highest net impact capture capacity that can realistically be developed. This slide finally shows our optimal forecast, which is for doing both things at once. In this case, 10 billion tons carbon per year of CO2 capture by amplified geoengineering, according to curve D, plus aggressive emissions control, according to curve C, would be applied simultaneously. Our model then forecasts PPM curve CD1 as the impact. Note that with emissions curve C being capped relatively early in 2023, capture curve D rising quickly before 2025, and natural sinks also assisting, this dual-pronged high-impact intervention becomes swift and effective. In fact, CD1 does not reach 450 ppm in this case, and the tipping level would be forestalled. Curve CD1 would peak at 419 ppm in 2023 and steadily diminish thereafter, reducing to 350 ppm by 2050 and 280 ppm by 2075. This is an optimal forecast. Intervention details will be presented in a second video available for you viewing on this website. To summarize targets for high impact capture plus emissions control, 10 billion tons carbon per year of net impact capture would be applied for 45 years from 2025 through 2070. A 12 billion ton carbon per year global cap on fossil fuel and cement emissions would be developed by 2023. Emissions would then be cut to 1 billion tons carbon per year by 2078. 1 billion tons carbon per year of offsetting unamplified maintenance capture would occur after 2070. This would keep CO2 below 425 ppm. The 450 ppm tipping level would be forestalled. 350 ppm would be restored by 2050 and 280 ppm by 2075. Dual high-impact intervention represents humanity's best chance of restoring climate, revitalizing oceans, relieving drought, and restabilizing polar ice. Polar ice stabilization would require several additional steps, but this intervention scenario would create a basic foundation for beginning that process. This is CRT's dual high-impact intervention scenario with an added contingency allowance to offset modeling forecast uncertainty and create a final formula for success. Curves C, D, and CD1 are the same as before. The only thing new is an added dash contingency capture curve D', which enables an extra 40% contingency for amplified capture. This creates a fair weather capture capacity of 17 billion tons carbon per year. That is the first level of added contingency. A second contingency level involves adding extra time for amplified capture. An extra 10 years is shown, but this may extend to 25 years or more if needed. A third and final level of added contingency is related to the indicated 1 billion ton carbon per year of maintenance capture planned for the period after 2070. This maintenance capture is intended to offset 1 billion tons carbon per year of fossil fuel and cement emissions, which will continue after 2078. However, if the final emissions target isn't met, then 2 billion tons carbon per year of extra maintenance capture contingency may be added to create a total of up to 3 billion tons carbon per year of unamplified maintenance capture. This would offset emissions target overruns, which might escalate as high as 3 billion tons carbon per year. To summarize, CRT has a three-pronged contingency plan to offset forecast uncertainty. It would begin with a 40% contingency allowance for amplified capture. This would offset project energy and fuel used for amplified capture. It would also make up for lost time resulting from bad weather interruption, repairs, etc. Essentially, 17 billion tons carbon per year of fair weather capture capacity would be developed to ensure 10 billion tons carbon per year of actual net impact capture. The second contingency level involves a 10 to 25-year optional extension of the amplified capture period. At 10 billion tons carbon per year of net impact capture, this would offset from 100 to 250 billion tons carbon total of unexpected outgassing, permafrost thaw release, or the uncompensated impact of feedbacks and extra land use change emissions which may have eluded model forecasting. A third and final contingency level would involve up to 2 billion tons carbon per year of additional unamplified maintenance capture to offset potential forecast overruns in fossil fuel and/or land use change emissions after 2070. Considering all three levels of contingency, the combined allowance for CRT's proposed dual high-impact intervention would be at least 80%. The final formula for success includes aggressive emissions control. Many different emissions recommendations have been made. However, our targets allow developing countries 50 years leeway for emerging energy needs and economic growth. Realistically, this will be necessary to obtain those countries' cooperation. Recent IPCC AR5 and the White House reports offer no prospect for restoring 280 ppm. That is because they fail to include high-impact capture in their forecasts. Humanity must look well beyond current recommendations of IPCC and the White House. It is no longer appropriate to speak only of emissions control. Adding high-impact capture of 17 billion tons carbon per year makes 280 ppm a viable 21st century target. In CRT's dual-pronged high-impact intervention scenario, 350 ppm would be restored 85 years earlier than with emissions control only. 280 ppm would be restored 250 years earlier. This is anticipated to have a profoundly beneficial impact on climate restoration, ocean revitalization, and polar ice stabilization. It may yet be accomplished in this century. CRT's primary message is that 280 ppm is within humanity's reach. It is a legacy we can leave for the future generations. Let's make it happen. A second video, entitled Energy and Transportation as Primary Engines for Climate Restoration and Ocean Revitalization, is also available for viewing on this website. It explains how impending tipping levels may be forestalled and how 280 ppm could be restored in this century. Thank you for your attention.